Okay. Okay, so today we are going to talk about fractions. Okay, and specifically we're going to talk about fractions that we're going to take fractions that have, well, specific type of fraction. This type of fraction is going to have a denominator that is a power of 10, okay, and the numerator, which is going to be a whole number. And we're going to write those as a decimal fraction. And so we're going to talk about decimal fractions today. Okay? So again, as always, we start with some definitions and some concepts, vocabulary. So now, what is a fraction? Well, a fraction is any number that looks like that, where the number on top and the number on the bottom are whole numbers, okay, except the bottom can't be 0, okay? That's a fraction, okay? Can't divide by 0, okay? So now, this top number is called the numerator. The bottom number is called the denominator. Okay, now think about numerator, or what I've heard people say, call it numerator, right? It tells you the number of pieces that you have, the number of parts that you have, out of the total number of parts that make up the whole unit. The denominator tells you basically how is that whole thing split up, okay? So think about this. The denominator tells you what kind of fraction you're dealing with, okay? So this kind of names the fraction in a manner, so to speak, okay? So this here tells what kind of fraction. So, or names it in a manner of speaking. Okay? And we're going to get into that a little bit more later, but again, just we're building the vocabulary and the understanding, and then you'll see where this comes in later. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to deal with a specific type of fraction where the denominator is a power of 10. Okay? So, and then we have decimal numerators. Okay? And we're going to write these as what we call decimal numbers or decimal fractions. Okay, so here's what we have. Oops. We have something like this. So in this case here, we have 3/10. So 3/10 is a fraction. And again, where we have a denominator that is a power of 10, right? This is just 10 to the first power. And then we have the numerator. Okay? So in this case here, how do we write this as a decimal? Well, 3/10, right? 3/10 is the same as, oops, not 0.1, 0.3. And how do we get that? Well, this is what we're going to talk about. So before we get to that, I'm going to show you the steps. Okay? So now, decimal fractions. Decimal fractions is a term by which we're using to rewrite a fraction as a decimal. So here's what I mean by that. Decimal fraction is also the same as, hold on, get a better marker. There you go. Decimal fraction is also the same as what we call a decimal number, sometimes called a decimal number. Or just simply decimal. So basically we're taking a fraction and we're writing it as a decimal. Now, if we have a power of 10 as the denominator, it makes this very easy, okay? So there's a very simple three-step process to take any fraction like this and write it as a decimal number or a decimal fraction. So the first thing we do is we use the denominator. So use the denominator okay, to find the number of decimal places we have to move. We're going to place the numerator, the last digit of the numerator, oops. Farthest to the right. And then basically we're going to fill in any blanks to the left of the digits here with zeros. So okay. So that's the three-step process that we're going to use. Okay, so now let's, and write this down because we're going to do an example and I'm going to show you how this works. Okay, so before we do that, let's talk about a couple of other things. Okay, and then we're going to do an example. Okay, so to fill in some missing pieces here about these steps. So, first of all, every decimal fraction or decimal number has a decimal point. Well, what is the decimal point? Well, sometimes we have, instead of 3/10, we might have something like this. 3.6. So what does this decimal point do? This decimal point is used to separate the whole part from the fractional part. Okay? So again, remember in the previous video where we had place values going this way. Remember we had place values going this way? Well, we also have place values going the other way. Okay, so remember, if we have something like this, we have the point. So let me write this out here. So we have the decimal. And so I'm going to write out So remember, on this side, we have the ones column, right? The place value for ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, and so on. Well, we have a similar ordering over here, but in this case, we start with what we call the tenths, THS. So these all have THS endings, okay? So this would be the tenths, followed by the hundredths, and then the thousandths, okay, and so on. Okay, so look at these are the naming of the denominator in this specific special case, right? So notice also that the ones are all, remember when I said in a previous video that we have a base 10 numeral system? Well, that means every place value is a power of 10. So all the place values are determined by certain powers of 10. So for example, the ones place is 10 to the 0. Because any number raised to the 0 power is 1. So this is the ones place. This is the tens place, 10 to the 1. 10 to the second is the hundredths place. 10 to the third power is the thousandths place. And so on. Now what about the other side? Well, on this side, now we're going to go to negative exponents. So in other words, let me write it this way. Let me get this out of here. Instead of multiplying by powers of 10, over here we are dividing by powers of 10. Okay? So now that's what's going on here. So now you can see kind of like where I'm going with these powers of 10. We're dividing by powers of 10. And by powers of 10, it tells us where we fit in the decimal place. Okay? And so now, if you go back to those 3 steps, it should start making sense what we're doing. Because in essence, when we write something as a decimal, it helps us figure out where the decimal point needs to be at by knowing, hey, the power of 10 in the denominator. Okay, so let's, hold on a second. Oh, by the way, so this, another thing, this, anytime that we have a number that has a whole part and a fractional part, is what we call a mixed number. Okay, so this would be an example of a mixed number. So any number that has a whole part and a fractional part, okay, is it called a mixed number. Okay, so again, just remember that. That's a mixed number. Okay, so we'll talk about mixed numbers again later on. But that is all I want to do today. So next time what we're going to do is we're going to do, well, you know what, let's do an example now. So let's do an example. So I am going to, you know what, let me look at this. So let's do an example. Let's write 3/10. So this will be example 2. But you know what? We'll do an example next time. Let's leave it at that. So the next video we'll do a few examples of doing those 3 steps. Okay, have a good day.